Hi everyone, I'm Kawiak Jones, and welcome to the first of 4 video episodes about the fortified front of the Odra-Barta rivers. About myself, I'm one of the few people who feel as good underground as I do above. I find extreme pleasure in exploring dark, dirty, and damp places such as caves, tunnels, old mines, etc. Generally speaking, the deeper, darker, and narrower the place, the more fun it is. Today in this video, I will bring you closer to one such place, where my passion for deep penetration originally started. I will show you one of the biggest and most technologically advanced fortifications in Europe and tell you more about its ingenious technical systems. I will also present an unusual way of exploring this place. It's not accessible to everybody, however, together with my friend Bogu, we managed to explore it in a very interesting and pioneering way. The fortified front of the Odra-Barta rivers is a masterpiece of military technology. It remains one of the largest and most interesting systems of its type in the world today. Built on the Nazi German and Polish border 180 kilometers east of Berlin, it was one of the most modern military constructions in Europe and can compete with the Maginot Line in eastern France in terms of size and ambition. The very first construction works began in 1925. However, this only consisted of draining watercourses, digging canals, and building dams. Although the Treaty of Versailles prohibited the building of any new fortifications along the German border, Article 180 of the treaty required them to keep the system of fortified works on the southern and eastern frontiers of Germany maintained in their existing state, leaving an open gateway for German engineers to use their imagination. The League of Nations hoped that this strategy would have made Germany a buffer zone against Bolshevik invasion from the east. The Germans took full advantage of this and demolished the old brick bunkers with the formal reason of weather damage and replaced them with new reinforced concrete constructions. But the Germans only bothered with this facade in the initial stages, and the further they progressed, the fewer the provisions of this treaty were observed. In 1934, building works were at their highest level of intensity. What is more interesting and worth mentioning is that for the construction works, the Germans did not yet use forced labor or prisoners, but used full-time employees of a German building company. Construction of the last facilities were forecast to be finished in 1951. Ultimately, fortifications were to be 80 kilometers long, with a total of 330 combat shelters, spaced approximately 250 meters apart. Each one was capable of operating independently, together making a long, heavily armored fortified front. An underground complex was constructed, providing a connection between the sites, safely protected against enemy activity. This roadway was planned with a total of 22 underground train stations, with the name of each station borrowed from German telegraphic code. Today, approximately 30% of the total planned works were completed, including 13 of the underground stations up to the interruption of construction at the end of 1941. The main roadway consists of 11 kilometers of tunnels. Added to that are almost 16 kilometers of smaller branch tunnels, and additionally 2 underground electric railway loops at around 2,000 square meters each. Also, an additional 2-leveled military barracks and washrooms were built. Over 500,000 tons of sand with a total volume of around 300,000 cubic meters were excavated to build this fortification. And all this without heavy equipment, only simple shovels and manpower. After their successful campaign against Poland first and the Soviet Union after, the still unfinished fortification system was considered by the German authorities less useful. At the turn of 1941, a huge part of the equipment was disassembled and further reused to fortify the Atlantic Wall. However, simultaneous construction works were progressed, mainly by securing unfinished sites and blocking branches from the main roadway. The last stage of expanding construction of bunkers took place in 1944, when the Russians were only one step from Warsaw and barely 400 kilometers from the fortified front. Hitler didn't agree to expand combat shelters behind the lines of fighting soldiers, predicting that it may discourage them from fighting. Eventually he agreed, though much too late, strongly influenced by Heinz Guderian. He ordered him to prepare the front for defense. The same Guderian was previously in charge of 42,000 Germans during the invasion of Poland, in which he faced 360 Polish soldiers who successfully managed to stave off his attack for 4 days. The Polish defenders were located in 7 combat shelters, so it can be assumed that Guderian used his knowledge to plan his defensive line. He created a large-scale plan for the upgrade of the whole front. But this plan was eventually halted by winter and lack of supplies. The bunker complex consists of a mix of dome-topped weapons installations, underground tunnels, and anti-tank fortifications, including the type commonly called Dragon's Teeth. This type of barrier ranges along almost the whole central part and was an insurmountable obstacle for tanks weighing up to 20 tons. During this construction phase in 1937, there weren't yet any tanks in use like this, but then in 1944, the main force of the Russian offensive was the 27-ton T-34. Therefore, 2 more rows of teeth were planned to be built. But because of the lack of time to do this, 10,000 Hitlerjugend members from the whole of the Brandenburg region were mobilized in order to dig a deeper anti-tank trench instead. And it was a very smart move, as ditches not only hinder the enemy from passing, but also provide a higher escarpment to protect against artillery fire. To be precise, I took the liberty of calculating the full 9-kilometer stretch between the 2 ends. There are 5,200 rows of dragon teeth. Each row consists of 4 beams placed 1.7 meters apart, making a total of around 21,000 metal reinforced concrete beams. You have to admit that this is a stunning sight even today. The first site I will start with is Panzer 717. This isn't super original, as every article about this bunker system starts from there. This is one of the very few entirely maintained bunkers of the system. It's renovated and open for tourists to visit all year round, which is something that I strongly recommend. This bunker has been constructed to level B1 on the resistance scale, which means wall thickness of 1.5 meters with dense, multi-layered reinforcement consisting of cubes with a side length of about 20 to 25 centimeters. Such a wall is resistant to multiple direct hits from 220mm caliber rounds. Bunker 717 was covered by many domes and panzer plates manufactured in the Krupp's factory. Thanks to the chrome molybdenum steel used, it was highly resistant to direct hits by high-caliber rounds, deforming like plastic to absorb the energy. This dome was tested by Russians right after World War II. Archived reports show that if the dome were hit by a shell with a soldier inside it, the impact force would not kill him, but would cause stunning and deafness. This combat shelter is equipped with 2 machine gun domes, each with 2 guns. Each dome weighs 51 tons with armor plate thicknesses between 23 and 32 centimeters. They are double leveled, with a fighting deck on top and a technical and munitions deck below. The main weapon for this combat shelter was a 50mm machine mortar hidden beneath another 26-ton Panzer dome. Despite the caliber, it was not the most powerful weapon, but its main power was the rate of fire. This, when added to a 360-degree field of view and 750-meter range, resulted in enormous firepower. Besides the barbed wire, this shelter was protected against infantry by a swivel fortress flamethrower. This front was the first one ever to be equipped with such a weapon. A range of 40 meters and the ability to shoot in 90-second waves made it a power to contend with. Preparing such a flamethrower to fight took only 120 seconds, and thanks to supply tanks located on the lower level, it was able to shoot in 20 waves of 90 seconds. The shelter's fire was directed from a 39-ton observation dome with periscope turrets. And this small thing next to it was a ventilation dome, placed at the highest point to help prevent gas attacks. And if this wasn't enough, on the back there was an additional heavy machine gun stand behind a Panzer plate, type 7P7, weighing 8 tons and 10 centimeters thick. The hooks above were used to attach camouflage nets, and those semicircular hooks were to prevent debris from falling and blocking the entrance. It is worth mentioning that those armored doors were not the main entrance to the bunker. The main stream of people and supplies happened underground using electric trains. This semicircular hole in the ground is an emergency exit. Not to call it impractical, but a lot of people might say that its placement would make using it in the middle of a firefight risky. But this one, although fully functional, had more of a psychological effect for the crew than actual functionality. Such a bunker is actually referred to as a combat shelter because of its connection with a wider underground system via a shaft with an elevator and stairs. It had its own water source, generators, and supplies for 60 days of fighting. I want to repeat myself here and say that 330 similar shelters were planned, with one shelter built every 250 meters on average. To sum up, if you want to conquer such a shelter, you have to get through an anti-tank trench, dragon teeth, barbed wire, booby traps, somehow survive the fire of 4 heavy machine guns and flames from the flamethrower, and all that during heavy mortar fire with a rate of 2 shells per second. Then at the backfield, you have to deal with another heavy machine gun and somehow tear off 700-kilogram armored doors. Just behind it, another machine gun and 4-meter-deep manhole with another rifle slit. It's almost unimaginable to believe that such a combat shelter was built in 2 to 3 months. But that's a fact, It took only 60 to 90 days to dig into the earth, a 2-level reinforced concrete superfortress, and fill it with complex, fully functional killing machinery. After visiting Site 717 from the surface, Bogu and I are heading north together to see another shelter, Panzerwerk 730, or should I say, its remains. On our way, we pass by the north end of the Dragon Teeth, which are barely visible because of the grass. Coming back to 730, it was really hard to find. Our navigation is being constantly interrupted by high grass. The shelter is so overrun by bushes that it's really easy to miss. This one is particularly interesting because after the war, Soviet troops blew up the construction to recover the domes. After that, they covered it with earth and located sophisticated radio installations on it, used by Moscow to communicate with its troops in East Germany. 730 is also the deepest one in the whole underground system. A 43-meter deep shaft with a diameter of 4 meters connects the shelter with an underground barracks. I will physically get to the underground part later, but I would like to talk about the armor and weapons at this site. 730 was very similar to the previous one, flamethrower, mortar, and 2 heavy machine guns in a 6-slit dome. It was also equipped with a 37-ton 3-slit dome for 1 heavy machine gun. The observation turret was this small turret, Type 23P8, called the Bell. The backfield was also protected by a heavy machine gun, but now we have the opportunity to take a better look at it. This is how it looked 80 years ago. The small slit on the left was an observation slit, once filled with 6-centimeter thick armored glass. The entrance to the bunker was walled up around 8 years ago, and I think that's the only reason we can see so much original writing on the walls, not covered with pathetic tags and other scrawls. And therefore, the only way to get in is through this machine gun hole in the 7P7 plate. I didn't manage to fit in, but lucky for me, and for you, I was with somebody who was smaller than me and got inside to record it. The shelter has been heavily damaged by explosives. Its western part is totally collapsed, but the remains of the elevator are still to be seen. But I will come back to that, being already underground. It's also possible to see the remains of the flamethrower system, mortars, bullets, lockers, and an almost complete plate covering the manhole. This tank is the flamethrower fuel tank. A lot of bats can be found here. I think this one doesn't know how to get out of this place. By visiting this shelter, I'm finishing the first part of my fortification series. There are still 3 episodes coming up, and in the second one, I will go where I feel most at home, underground.